Welcome to the 32nd episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
Welcome again. We are continuing our series of discussing all of Alfred Hitchcock's films one by one. We are in mid-40s. Last time we discussed Spellbound, which was Hitchcock's psychoanalytical thriller starring Ingrid Bergman. And we are continuing his 1940s very fortunate stride with another thriller starring Ingrid Bergman and co-starring Cary Grant and Claude Rains called Notorious. Notorious is, notorious, I would say. It's a film of great reputation, unlike Spellbound, for example, which usually is maybe respected but also a little bit mocked. Notorious is definitely, for many scholars that we consult in their books that they have written on Hitchcock and in many materials, it's usually regarded as one of Hitchcock's finest thrillers in practically every way, technically, thematically, and we will try to discuss this very, very dense, very sensual, very complicated film from a screenplay by Ben Hecht. We will try to discuss it today in two parts, and we will start by discussing it with one another. And as we speak, actually, in about 40 minutes from now, we will connect via Zoom with Professor Patrick Keating, who teaches film at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Dynamic Frame, Camera Movement in Classical Hollywood, and also Hollywood Lightning, from the silent era to film noir. Before we connect with Professor Keating and before I hand it over to Sebastian, just a brief note, we became fans of Patrick Keating's book a while ago, I would say probably 2 or 3 years ago, when it was first published, and for both of us this was a revelatory book, because Patrick Keating does a wonderful job of, it's a work of academic scholarship, historical scholarship, and he does a wonderful job of putting a seemingly simple and innocuous issue like camera movement, camera moving through space, in a wonderful historical and aesthetic frame. And we'll be curious to hear what he has to say about the gliding camera movements of Ted Tetzloff's camera in Notorious, especially since this is a film that contains one of the signature, probably the most famous single take in Hitchcock's filmography, involving a key, but we will discuss it later on. So, first of all, Sebastian, when did you see this film first? What was your initial reaction? And what is your reaction now after revisiting it?
This is one of Hitchcock's films that I was watching when I was 13 or 14. One of these, probably, excuse all the listeners, excuse me for saying that, probably one of the pirated copies that I managed to obtain when I was a teenager in Poland. We had some official DVD issues of Hitchcock's film at that time, but still I was voraciously looking for everything that was there. So my first experience with Notorious, early 2000s probably, and that was the period when I was discovering what does it feel to really immerse oneself in classical Hollywood. So I definitely connected, yes, with my passion to Hitchcock, but also with my education in classical Hollywood. It was really one of these movies that showed me that you can really enter some very exciting territory that is gone by now. I mean, they don't make movies like that anymore. I felt that at the time, but still I was experiencing it on a small computer screen. Then I had the chance to watch it on a big screen at Cleveland Cinematographers a few years ago. That was also an amazing screening from a digital copy. So I experienced this film as I should have. But now coming back to it, I have some different feelings. I wasn't as much invested emotionally in these first two screenings when I was a teenager and at Cleveland Cinematographers, but now I think it's really great to come back to this film. I really love it. but I think the problematic fact is that it's so universally loved that you almost feel like you have the need maybe to say, no, it's not that perfect, no, it's not as good, I'm not as crazy about it. I would like to be a bit of a contrarian in this case, but I simply cannot. I was really happy to come back to it, to also watch it with Drew Casper's expert commentary. I watched several scenes, and I highly recommend this version because he's not only extremely knowledgeable, he's one of the most respected film professors in the United States, but he's also very passionate about movies.
And I think he's
awesome.
The Alfred Hitchcock professor.
Yes, that's right. Alma and Alfred, I think that's the name of this chair, Alma and Alfred. Hitchcock professor at University of Southern California, right?
I think so.
So definitely high point for me. I agree with many statements which say that, you know, it's a key Hitchcock film for this period, but I also like to think that I have some kind of personal relationship to it. We'll see during our conversation if we really can catch that. What about you? What's your story with Notorious?
Well, my story with Notorious is that in, I guess, early 2000s, when Amazon.co.uk started delivering to Poland, I ordered a copy of this film on VHS, and I watched it on VHS in English. I was about 18, 19 years old. And I guess I liked it, but I don't think I really understood it. I didn't understand the romantic entanglement of the film. I think it's a very adult film in a way. Last time we made fun a little bit of Spellbound, saying that, you know, it passed as adult entertainment in 1945, but from today's perspective, it's really naive, right? That is really, really almost trashy. And you cannot say that about Notorious. I think the material, the story, especially the relationship in the triangle between the Ingrid Bergman character, Alicia, Cary Grant's character, Devlin, and Alexander Sebastian, played by Claude Rains, I think this is a genuinely complicated relationship. So you cannot say, oh, this is like a campy entertainment. No, it's actually, I think now that I'm an adult, I see it in a more adult way. I also saw it projected digitally at BFI South Bank once, and I was hoping actually that screening would be on film, but it was digital. Still, it was a wonderful experience because when you are watching a Hitchcock film in a room full of people, first of all, you notice how relatively quiet this film is, because many scenes are without music, including the famous kissing scene, which is completely without music. And also, it's always interesting to see how people react to this situation of tension, and so it was a nice screening. But overall, I would say that the stocks of the film went up in my case. I think now I would say yes, and now I understand why people say that it's such a seminal Hitchcock film. And also I have to say, because this film benefits from one of the most lavish Criterion packages ever, which is really incredible. There are 2 commentaries, many extras. One of the best extras that I ever saw was the extra with David Bordwell, who analyzes the editing structure of the film. And I think this is the half hour that really establishes David Bordwell as the Superman of film analysis, especially his analysis of the descent from the stairs at the end when they are walking down the stairs. And he calls it
Hitchcock's Odessa
steps. It's mind-boggling. I mean, it's amazing. So you should see it if you watch just one extra, connected with this film. I would suggest the David Bordwell essay.
Oh, definitely. So to maybe join these 2 recommendations, watch first half an hour of Notorious with Drew Casper. Listen to which
is not on the Criterion.
Yes, that's not the Criterion. That's
another
the other edition.
Yeah.
But listen to the way he introduces the themes, characters. He does it in an amazing way. You can learn a lot about watching movies, and then watch David the extra with David Bordwell. It's really great. Yes, but.
So before we discuss just what the film is about, so the film is an espionage tale, which is very timely and topical. The year is 1946. the year of the premiere is 1946, and the film takes place in 1946. And this time it's not some imagined kingdom of Ruritania. It's actually United States. We start in Miami, Florida. We know that the war has ended. We know that there is a question of espionage, of Nazi espionage in the United States. And Alicia's father was actually convicted as a Nazi spy. She is approached by a special agent. The name CIA is not mentioned, or, well, it's not yet fully established, but the name FBI even is not mentioned. It's just a secret agent, and basically he makes her an offer. You know, maybe you will become a spy for the government. You can use some connections from your father's life. We know that you are loyal to the United States. We have some recordings to prove it. But would you like to be a spy, even if it entails some sexual espionage, Mata Hari style? And she says yes. The only thing that she doesn't know is that she will fall in love with Devlin, who is making this offer, and that a man that she will be spying upon would actually be her former lover, Alexander Sebastian, played by Claude Rains. So she's sort of caught between those two men with a very complicated net of feelings, and she's actually marrying Sebastian, which makes things even more complicated. And the rest is simply this espionage story with a bottle of champagne or wine filled with uranium at its very center. And we will definitely discuss the scene with the bottle being uncovered in the wine cellar, which I have to say is also one of the best sequences in Hitchcock. Absolutely. The party scene, and we'll go. But this is an espionage story. So, and Ingrid Bergman, I have to say the first thing, Ingrid Bergman is wonderful in this film. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. It was one of my, one of the 3 points I want to make. Yes, I think as the years pass, our gradual appreciation of Hollywood performances grows somehow. I think there was this period in Hitchcock reception and film studies when you were focusing on technique. This is something that David Bordwell does, but he also mentions, the quality and the skills of performances. But as the years pass, you may ask a question, why do we love Notorious so much? Of course, it's perfect in so many respects, but also at the core of it, there is Ingrid Bergman's amazing performance. So this is something absolutely unique. But I think, if you're listening to this podcast, you may ask the question, why this film is, such a pinnacle of Hitchcock's 1940s career? Why particularly this film? And of course, I think there are several questions. I'm usually the guy who introduces like this production studies, trivia, and stuff like that. So definitely one of the reasons is that it was the first production that Hitchcock was relatively free to produce, to manage. It's basically, I think, Hitchcock and Selznick story. It's a very funny story. I would like to watch a comedy, about their collaboration, because for half of the time, Selznick was deep into these very difficult, time-consuming and money-consuming projects, like Gone with the Wind, right? And now Duel in the Sun, at the time when Hitchcock was making Notorious, right? So Selznick is somewhere there. He's of course micromanaging everything, writing memos, trying to put his stamp on everything, but he cannot do that. So Hitchcock is relatively free to pursue his vision and his collaborators. So that's one of the reasons. Is it really? Is it? What do you think? Is it one of the reasons why Notorious feels so complete, that Hitchcock was relatively free? Because that would kind of point us towards the this auteur theory, right? I mean, he can be an auteur. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I mean, if you look at the evidence in the Patrick McGilligan biography and also many other materials, you can see the story of Hitchcock and Selznick basically is a story of an incredibly creative artist who had a very supportive producer back in the UK, in the person of Michael Balcon, who suddenly, when he comes to the States, he crashes against this iceberg of a producer who is very difficult, right? Who is very demanding, who basically, he's a contrarian, he fights for his own vision of films, and Hitchcock really needs to fight against him. And here, Hitchcock is still on contract, he's bound by the contract to Selznick, but he is working for RKO, and almost like he's like a producer on the film, so he has much creative freedom. And before we see another biopic of Hitchcock, I love the idea of a Selznick Hitchcock biopic.
But only a comedy, please.
Yes, Selznick played by Liev Schreiber and Hitchcock played by Paul Walter Hauser, for example. But before we see that, I would say that yes, I can imagine that here Hitchcock finally doesn't have this this figure of Selznick looking through his shoulder every second and saying no, you cannot do this, you have to do that. So, and yes, I think this, even when you look at Spellbound and this film, you can tell that something is very different. Something is really, really different. And I wouldn't call it naivete. That's not but simply, I think if you look at Duel in the Sun, Selznick had this, let's say, florid side to him that was very, very over the top. It was borderline vulgar. It was, baroque in a worst possible sense. Hitchcock can be extremely refined, and he can be also close to the top, but he's never really over the top. He has this taste that really has this cup of taste that restrains him several. And this film, I think, is a work of great taste because, when you look at every single detail, the Edith Head's costumes
are amazing.
and the zebra costume that Ingrid Bergman wears during the early party scene, and all of the costumes really. And when you look at the meticulous framing, and we will definitely discuss it in a second, but with Professor Keating, but this is a work of such intimacy. The camera is so close to the characters for many, many scenes. You can see them very close. The famous kissing scene that is, it's like almost like a joke now that everybody says that yes, he was trying to surpass the Hays Code because there was a time limit on the kisses, so he broke up one long kiss into like myriad little pecks and kisses and nibbles. So yes, but again, no music in the background. There's this gliding camera movement. It's a single take, I think.
Low-key lightning in the other balcony scene, right?
And you are so close to them. And they speak very gently. And when you listen to this film, they don't really shout. They speak very gently. It's high manners throughout, I would say. Maybe it changes a little bit towards the end. But yes, I think this is a work of tremendous taste. And Ingrid Bergman, again, I think she should have been awarded an Academy Award for this performance, because she's sensuous. She plays against type at that time. She was fresh from Casablanca, just as Claude Rains was. And, she is not a damsel in distress. She's a complicated woman, sexually liberated woman, who enters a very dangerous situation and is playing multiple sex games, but not in a predatory way, but in a very vulnerable way. She puts herself out there for the love of Devlin, whom she knows that he cannot really reciprocate her feelings because he's very twisted, I would say. So this is a complex character, and if this movie was remade years later, I would say that an actress like maybe Kathleen Turner could play this role. So I'm amazed just by how complex this film is. It's a very, very complex film. And if you remember that Ben Hecht was actually a journalist, and he was, of course, he's a legendary screenwriter, but he wanted to comment on contemporary events, right? Bomb in Hiroshima just went off. It was immediately after the war. Nobody knew exactly where the world will go. And here, the issue of atomic bombs, of Nazis in the U.S. This is the time when U.S. employs many Nazis, actually, because, they invite them, like Professor Werner von Braun, to work for them. So it's a very, very, very morally, shifty ground. And yes, I think this is a masterpiece of complexities in this film.
So this is one thing. I totally agree with you. The other thing would be time, simply time. I think it's one of these rare occasions in Hitchcock filmography up to that point. As you can see, just think about it. He's been making movies directing movies for 19 years, 20 years, right? It's like, let's say Notorious marks his 20th anniversary as a director. And what? 32, 33 feature films, very fast paced. But Notorious starts to be developed in 1944. Then it's languishing a bit. There are rewrites. Even I think Clifford Odets joins party for a short time, but they don't. I think he didn't improve the script much. So the production is postponed. They have a lot of time to refine the script. So I think that's also one of the reasons why it works so well. And as you mentioned, Notorious is actually surprisingly timely. Because at the time, at least if we believe in these fascinating stories of Hecht and Hitchcock visiting physicists in 1945, asking about atomic bomb, and the physicist saying, "Don't speak that word. It's a national secret." No, it was before Hiroshima. So that's one of the reasons why Selznick didn't want to do it. It was so absurd. A movie with a MacGuffin that is centered around some uranium ore and supposed bomb, which doesn't exist yet in worldwide consciousness, and then suddenly the movie gets made, and we have this terrible event which actually ends World War II, and the movie is suddenly timely. But of course, what is so fascinating is that it's not really that important, right? That's also the question of what is the center of Notorious. Not many people will say that. Let's say that the plot about the Nazis itself is the center, right? But I always get kicks from Nazis on screen. I just like the Boys from Brazil is one of my guilty pleasures, and of course this movie is exactly about boys who are in Brazil, Nazis or ex-Nazis, whatever. I think they're, let's say, actively Nazis. So that's another reason that this movie was developed for such a long period of time, that it can get refined and perfected and is very tasty, full of taste. And the other thing you mentioned, the music, exactly, that it's a quiet movie. It's also a movie which has very few action scenes, almost not at all. Probably the most thrilling scene in conventional sense is the first scene when they are driving a car, right? And that's one of the rare scenes. It operates on a totally different level of this like aesthetic choices, glances, people looking at each other, pieces of dialogue which are very piercing. I think for me, why this movie works so well when I'm 30, and maybe I didn't get it when I was 14, is this masochism, which is inherent in this relationship, and it's still hurting, and that's, I think, amazing. But coming back to what you mentioned about the intimacy, that of course is the center of the famous kissing scene. I found this, fascinating observation about Hitchcock's use of rear projections, which of course takes, you don't take anything at face value when you discuss Hitchcock. You always want to go deeper. And in this sense, there is this theory that his rear projections, for example, in Notorious, are not perfect, precisely because he wants us to focus just on this couple. He wants us to, be with them, to be a third party, to the two of them, to feel this intimacy. And that's why when they are sitting at a cafe in Brazil, you have this fuzzy, out of focus rear projection, which is obviously artificial, right? By the way, the scenes in Brazil were shot by Greg Toland, apparently. But this is let's say, you can say on one hand, when contemporary viewers, maybe if our students were watching this film, they would say, oh, this rear projections are just terrible. It's so fake. I mean, how can I enter these relationships if on an aesthetic level it doesn't convince me? But of course, the argument is that it's precisely the point, this level of artificiality, which brings us closer to these performances. You focus entirely on Ingrid Bergman's face and body and Cary Grant's body. What I think also is beautiful for me and also a bit scary in this film is that they don't really listen to each other's bodies, however contrived this sounds, but much of the masochism in this film is focused on the fact that they really just listen to each other. They listen to what they are saying, but they're not reading each other's bodies. But of course we do as viewers, right? We as viewers, we know that Cary Grant is very ambiguous about what he should do. Should he allow her to, go to Sebastian or not, right? We realize that, but in this language of love that they are sharing, or maybe pre-love, or maybe a language of falling in love, Ingrid Bergman doesn't want to see it, or he just cannot see it. So, there are all these levels of bodily or emotional dimensions, I think, in this film, which I find very striking and beautiful.
Yes, I agree. And the point about the backgrounds and the rare projection is wonderful. It's developed in another extra on the Criterion disc when I think John Bailey speaks about this. Yeah, I always wonder. I don't know. Like, had someone did this today, shot a scene of lovers speaking, and there would be like a back projection, fuzzy back projection in the background, you would say this is an avant-garde film. It's not even like a real film.
Late Alain Resnais, for example.
Late Alain Resnais. So, and here you sort of accept it. I think, yes, the younger viewers are probably more, skeptical about it, because I think this sort of dogma of Netflix total visibility, that everything has to be sharp, in focus, colorful,
well lit, usually.
Well lit. It just turns people to, expecting this fake hyper-realism. Everything suddenly is like a photo wallpaper, that's sharp. But yes, I fully agree, and I think that what I didn't realize, someone also pointed it out, that Cary Grant is almost cast against type, because he's not this debonair, witty, gentleman. He's really much of a darker figure. When he slaps her in the car, but also just by being so, commitment phobic on one way, and then like treating her so deceitfully, it's like he's two-faced, because on one hand he pushes her into the situation, on another he holds her in contempt. The more she gets into the situation, being married to Claude Rains is fantastic news for the inquiry, because she, as a spy, she just landed the biggest success. He gives her full confidence. So she is succeeding exactly in the task that Devlin hired her for. But as she is succeeding so brilliantly, he turns on this contempt, the sexual contempt, saying that, basically like slut-shaming her, so this is who you really are. So this is an impossible situation. It's like the ultimate mixed message, be a great spy, but don't employ your sexuality in it, or employ it only to the extent that I allow you to. It's a horribly sort of like a sadistic, I think, trope in this Cary Grant character. And somebody, I don't remember who it was, pointed out that okay, the movie ends with them going away, but probably this will be a terrible relationship, right? That you can imagine, like 2 days later, as when she purges the poison from her system, she's being poisoned for the last quarter of an hour. What will be the first thing that he tells her? I can imagine he's saying something horrible to her. Like, so did you enjoy it? Like being in this Nazi's house. You can imagine the toxicity, and 20 years later there will be like this embittered, sadomasochistic couple in Ulrich Seidel film, basically. So it's a very complex films that touches on ugly feelings, I would say, and we know that Hitchcock had those ugly feelings. We all have ugly feelings, but we know that he sublimated them a lot. In later films they will come out more, but here it's like this impossible sexual riddle, like who are those two people in relationship to one another, how they should relate. I mean, Devlin is attracted to her because she's so open in a way about her sexuality. She's very modern. On the other hand, as soon as she becomes too much in power of her sexuality, he retreats and shames her, and she is also, I think, quite ambiguous in all of this. She craves domesticity, she makes this chicken and serves dinner, but on the other hand she is a spy. When somebody is a spy, I think there's always something strange in that. So yeah, it's adult entertainment in the good sense, I would say.
Exactly, and there are many symmetries, of course, as Professor Bordwell enumerates them. One which I found striking and I think rarely discussed, for me, the two balcony scenes, the way they complement each other. This is precisely that. The first one is this famous kiss, and preparation of food, right? No, talking about food, right? The food is being prepared in that second scene, but this is a lovely.
Will we eat with the fingers? Like, will we use plates? Hitchcock, what are you envisioning here? Like eating the chicken without plates in bed. Like, what's going on?
Food is in many ways equated with sex in Hitchcock universe. So yeah, hopefully we'll explore it as well. But yeah, this is a great scene, no doubt. But then there is like this huge emotional cut in this relationship when Cary Grant, he just goes. There is this one short scene when he's speaking with his superiors, and then he gets the news what her mission will be. And then he's coming back. It's like, what, a few hours passed, I think, between one event and the other in terms of, like, the time of the action. But the scene is completely different because he has to be different because of the expectations that are put on him. But this is striking. In many other movies, especially Hollywood movies of the time, would have some kind of gradual change in their relationship or some kind of montage or anything that would indicate this changing temperature of emotions. Not here, right? It's the few hours later, he's like super cold, no nuzzling, no, humorous pieces of dialogue, just very cold.
Freezes. He's like freezing cold. And this is also like, he's accessible 1 minute, then he pulls back.
Exactly.
It's like, today you would say, it's like almost like an emotional violence, that he pulls her in, and then suddenly he's, you can imagine like domestic violence going on in that relationship. Which is again the fantastic cast. I think the element that makes it great, with all the elements that are there, is but it's casting of Claude Rains. Because if that character was cast differently, I think Clifton Webb was considered, that would be an entirely different film. Because for example, if Clifton Webb, had Clifton Webb to play this character, you wouldn't be so invested into this. Like he would be like in Laura, right? He would be the Otto Preminger Laura. He would be this older man, with ambiguous sexuality, but also capable of appreciating woman's beauty and blah blah blah. But Claude Rains he's manly and he's very delicate. He has all the qualities, the good qualities that Devlin doesn't have. He's genuinely caring. He is a good husband. He's a good husband material, despite being the Nazi, right?
That's not that important here.
but you look at him and say, yes, like Alicia could be happy with him. He's attentive to her, and he even stands up to his mother to protect Alicia, right? And to give her the full prerogatives of the lady of the house by giving her the famous Unica key. But and so everybody would say, like, yes, Claude Rains is the man for you, except that he's a Nazi. So, you really should be with Cary Grant because he's the American agent. But emotionally, this equation definitely pulls you towards saying that, yes, Claude Rains probably is the better husband. And that would be the case with Clifton Webb. I mean, he wouldn't care. I mean, you might have had some campy pleasure from watching him, but not this kind of affection, that Claude Rains, who, after all, played an angel in Here Comes Mr. Jordan. I mean, he played an angel for a reason, because he's simply so affable and trustworthy, and everybody likes him in Casablanca. He's such a great guy, in Casablanca.
Exactly. So I think approximately 70% of our sympathy towards Cary Grant is, of course, based on his previous performances.
Being Cary Grant.
Exactly. So that's precisely the one of these films that you cannot really try to read it in vacuum. It's a great performance. It's self-sufficient in many ways, but also it's part of a dialogue, right? Of a, let's say, Hollywood dialogue about Cary Grant. So I think, I totally agree with you. I found this nice comment. I mean, I think it's McGilligan's comment that Claude Rains felt a bit vulnerable about the fact that he was, aging, getting old. And also, of course, he wasn't the tallest of the actors. So there are like reasons, the small elements of vulnerability which play out great. And once again, when you look at previous Hitchcock movies about his propaganda movies, you see it's never that simple, right? And it's one of the portrayals of this of a Nazi that we can really relate to in some ways. So of course it's perverse. As you mentioned, the ending is also perverse. So Hitchcock is providing maybe a bit like we could say, Douglas Sirk, right? Providing this happy ending, which really, on this ironic level, is not happy at all, right? Because one of our favorite characters in the movie will die, like, probably within a few hours.
Yes, and before we connect with Professor Keating, I would say that it will be interesting to see how Douglas Sirk would have directed this material, because it is a Douglas Sirk kind of film, with Alicia driving drunkenly at the beginning. You can see her, like, driving.
Written
It'll be
in the wind.
Written in the wind. It will be, Robert Stack could play Devlin, and Rock Hudson could play, or I don't know. Anyhow, that could be a Douglas Sirk film. I would say that the only thing that really dated badly, well, maybe not badly, but it dated, it's the mother character, Leopoldine Constantine, because she's a little bit over the top as this bad mother, like the when I remember that at the screening at BFI, there was just one moment when people laughed, and it wasn't a planned laughter. When she lights up a cigarette, she learns that Alicia is the American spy, and she doesn't say it. She just it's a long moment, like prolonged moment, that she lights the cigarette, and people are laughing. Like that's the Oedipal mother, basically, with this phallic, symbol. She's the man in the family.
But also the scene in which she is introduced is also borderline over the top, as when it comes to Notorious. I mean, there's a very long take when she descends the stairs. I think it's a great shot, but it's and I like the comment by, I think, Stephen D. Katz, the author, that it's her predatory mode because she's not blinking.
She's not blinking.
So it's great, but probably when you watch it with the audience, which is more attuned to irony and this overacting and so on, it may be too much. I didn't feel it that way watching just with my wife, just watching the two of us. But certainly, I think that the ultimate test of such movies is watching it with
yes,
a large audience.
I love the comment about her not blinking, and I would say that Norman Bates's mother also doesn't blink when we see her in Psycho. We see those gaping holes of eyes, and I think it's her. I think this is exactly the mother. This is the same woman that we see. Not literally, but this is exactly the mother that the son is yelling at, and you're saying, give me back my life. It's just that Norman Bates went one step further than Claude Rains, and but both had very interesting sellers. So.
Exactly, and I did a bit of research to see if we can somehow connect this mother, not with Hitchcock's mother or some kind of autobiographical reading of Hitchcock's work, but with Nazis in general, the sexuality of Nazis and so on. And of course, there's this famous book which has like 900 pages, Male Fantasies by Klaus Teweleit, a German author, who analyzes sexuality of Nazis, and there is just a very short subchapter about mothers, and mothers really weren't that important for Nazis. Of course, they were some point of reference, sometimes sheltering them from demanding fathers, sometimes also being themselves in need of protection or something when they were turning into mothers that were maybe had some sexual ideas that sons didn't approve. So of course there was this quasi-Freudian element, but basically we don't have a huge literature on mothers in terms of Nazis, which again shows you that maybe it wasn't an anthropological study of Nazis. Definitely, that was some kind of a concept and idea which worked great.
It's a Hitchcock mother first and Nazi mother second. Okay, let's try to connect with Professor Keating.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, hello. Hi. That's cool. Very good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really. This is Sebastian. I'm Michał. This is Sebastian.
So first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to connect with us, to meet us. As I mentioned, we are truly, really fans of your books, and this approach to movies is really inspiring for us. So even you have readers in Poland, of all places as well.
Great. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you. And I should say I've listened to some of the podcasts already, and I'm really enjoying them. Yeah, I listened to Sabotage, and then I listened to the one with The Lady Vanishes.
Lady Vanishes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Great.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so we'll simply start by asking our first question, and then we'll see how the conversation goes. So, Sebastian.
So the direct reason that we decided to tried to approach you was, of course, the cover of your latest book. So we can see on that cover, we can see the famous production still from Notorious, with, I think, one of these men is Ted Tetzlaff, right? The director of cinematography on Notorious, and of course we see Ingrid Bergman on the left. Yeah, I have it here. So why that image? I mean, I'm sure there were many reasons, but maybe let's start with that because it's maybe important for our listeners.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful image, and I like how the image really kind of emphasizes maybe like the collaborative way of filmmaking. So you've got sort of multiple people kind of working with the camera, and it also includes Ingrid Bergman, and how the actor also has to be aware of where the camera is. And so that was one of the themes in the book. I thought was that it takes a lot of people to move the camera. It's both something that the director, of course, is deeply involved in, but the director has to coordinate so many other people for a great shot to work. And then, so that's one reason. And then I guess the second reason is another major theme of the book is the idea of storytelling as revelation and concealment. I thought a lot in the book about, the idea of, is the camera ever omniscient? And that particular shot seems like an interesting test case because there is, in some sense, it's kind of like this godlike perspective, and then it actually zeroes in on the crucial detail. So there is something omniscient about that idea, but at the same time, the way the shot actually unfolds as you're watching it, you don't feel as if you know everything. It actually engages in a kind of mechanics of surprise, more than you might expect, because last time we saw the key, she was kicking it under the table, so we don't quite know where the key is. We don't exactly know where the camera is heading as it's moving downwards, so it's actually a kind of great surprise that, oh, she really does have the key, and there it is, right in her hands.
I obviously we both loved both the shot in the film and the production still. Today we are discussing Notorious in our ongoing cycle. What I love, again, both about the shot and about the still, is that it really makes you think about camera as a tool of scrutiny of the body. Basically, because we, as you said, we don't know where the camera will end as the shot begins. We see the spacious hall, we see many people moving around, bodies, in free motion, and we don't really know that what we will end up looking at will be this tiny, fragment of the palm of the hand. And also, I think from the actress's point of view, she's still acting, but she's not acting with this stern look that we see here. This won't be revealed to the viewer. She is acting literally with her hand, fidgeting this key. So I think that it's incredible how the camera turns from this sort of godlike, very, very wide ranging eye to something that scrutinizes the body in every single microscopic motion. And I would like to ask you specifically about this shot, but also about Notorious in general. Is this the film that you would say that epitomizes Hitchcock at some specific point in his career? Speaking from the perspective of cinematography, do you see it as a pinnacle of some phase, or is it maybe simply a typical Hitchcock film, period? Like, where would you place the visual style of the film in Hitchcock's oeuvre?
Yeah, well, first, I'm just kind of thinking of this idea of the scrutiny of the body, and I think that really fits for Notorious. It certainly fits for this shot. I'm also thinking of that other shot where, that kiss, where the camera is in close-up, and then they walk all the way from the balcony to inside the space. and they're just kept in tight close up for the entire time. I think that maybe kind of develops this idea of the scrutiny of the body, specifically the scrutiny of their faces. And maybe there's even that idea planted in that not quite opening scene, but that party scene where we first see Cary Grant and we're stuck looking at the back of his head. That maybe introduces this idea of scrutiny, because we probably know it's Cary Grant, and yet we want to get a better view of him, and yet we're denied this view of him. And yet she clearly does have a view of him and is very interested in his face.
And also of the hair that gets into her eyes, right? at one point.
Yeah. So that seems like an idea that's planted early in the film and developed throughout. I do think in his career in the 1940s, a number of filmmakers were thinking of the idea of representing subjective experience on film and the idea of point of view shots. And he's certainly playing with that, throughout his entire career. But I think he's very much associated with that in Hollywood's eyes, that Hitchcock is, I think, kind of the leader of this trend. And so I do quote some of the articles that appear in American Cinematographer around this time, 46, 47, often written by Herb Lightman, which are commenting on subjectivity as a trend in Hollywood. And most of his examples are from Hitchcock. So I do think this is one of his films where he's exploring this idea of using the camera to represent a character's point of view. But of course, he's never going to go as far as something like Lady in the Lake. I think he already correctly sees that could be a dead end, and does not go down that path. And to go to the famous overhead shot, and that's an example of a shot that is not a point of view shot. It's like, here's this view that absolutely nobody has, and yet it has a subjective quality in the sense that she's in the party, she's pretending to be thinking about the party, but she's not thinking about the party. She's thinking about what's in her hands. So in that sense, the movement of the shot is kind of echoing what's going on in her head.
So I have a trick question based on the being familiar with your books. So I've read The Dynamic Frame first, and of course the real heroes of your story are cinematographers and the journal American Cinematographer, but of course Hitchcock and Wells, I would say, especially maybe Preminger as well, are also important protagonists, let's say, of the story. And you describe beautifully, the ways in which Hitchcock was blocking actors in Rebecca. You describe Notorious and Rear Window and so on. But then I turned to your book about Hollywood lighting, and there Hitchcock is not such an important character. Of course, I guess one of the reasons was that when you're focusing on 20s and 30s, he's not in Hollywood, of course, so he's not making Hollywood movies at the time. But basically, do you think he was more important as a person planning camera movements than as a person designing lighting? What do you think about, Hitchcock as a, director concerned with lighting? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it more stems from just a kind of general, just sort of shorthand assumption I make, which I think works most of the time, but not all the time, which is, I'm inclined to say cinematographers are more responsible for lighting and that directors are more responsible for camera movement. I do think that a number of directors I've seen in interviews would agree with that. And I think a number of cinematographers in interviews would agree with that. It is a shorthand, so, I'm sure it doesn't apply in all cases. I would imagine Hitchcock, being the visual thinker that he is going to be, controlling the lighting more than your average director will. But I do think that the two books ended up going in that direction, just sort of starting from that shorthand assumption that the Hollywood lighting book is really a book about cinematographers, and then the main players in that, John F. Seitz and William Daniels and James Wong Howe end up being some of the recurring figures in that book. And then in the dynamic frame, it's Murnau and Hitchcock and Wells end up being the crucial figures in that book. Now, as for lighting in Hitchcock, I can say I'm working on a book about lighting in film noir. And so I'm hoping to have a chapter on Strangers on a Train. So that is going to have several examples from that. And I think I have a few other examples from the Paradigm Case, which is a beautifully lit film. That's really has some gorgeous photography. And I don't mention Notorious hardly at all, except for one scene. But this I think the glamour photography is really quite strong in Notorious.
Before we connected, we discussed a little bit the issue of back projection in Notorious, which is truly omnipresent in the film. Many of the scenes, especially the intimate scenes of conversations, are shot against rear projection. And we commented on how our students, when we teach film here in Warsaw and on other occasions, people born, let's say, in 21st century are extremely reluctant toward. I mean, they immediately see the artifice. They valorize the artifice as something, unwanted, bad, and they don't. They are reluctant even to enter the world of the film because they immediately sense that this is fake. They are not really in Rio. Is this what are your thoughts on the usage of rear projection in this film and films of the period? And maybe do you have a chance to discuss it with your students? Perhaps maybe something really changed in our perception mechanism between 1946 and 2022.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll make a confession that I'm maybe a little with the students here sometimes. I think I remember when I was young, watching North by Northwest, that all that stuff, driving over the cliff and whatnot, and my whatever 12-year-old self was like, look at this back projection. It's ridiculous. So I think I kind of know where they're coming from. I'm to the point that I've watched enough movies that I almost sort of don't notice it as much as I used to. So and maybe I'm hoping my students will eventually get to the point where they can overlook it. I do discuss it a little bit in the book, but it's not kind of a major topic in the book. I try to make the case that maybe occasionally it can sort of add to the film thematically. But I don't know. I think there's a part of me that maybe doesn't quite believe it. There's a part of me that sometimes is thinking, well, if they had gone to Rio, probably would have been a little bit better. So maybe I'm a little with the students on that.
No, that's a great point. I have related question in a way to this one and the previous one. Let's try to maybe use our imagination, because one of the two things that I found fascinating as a Polish reader, which and Polish film studies are of course I would say they are generally very different from American ones. Of course, we translate and read a lot of American stuff, but still, for example, in Poland, this idea of Hollywood films being so invisible is still persistent. You know, it's one of the myths that you are trying to destroy, and that's, I think, you do it in a great way. You're in many places you mentioned that, you know, it's not invisible; it's just very subtle, and I love this idea that you are trying to describe the subtlety, the invisibility, which is really subtlety of the style, and I love it. So. Kind of another trick question. Notorious is certainly not the case. It's not the case of some of the mature John Ford's movies or 1930s movies that you described that are very subtle. In terms of lighting and some camera movements, it's not a subtle thing. You notice that. You notice that. So what's your attitude towards this kind of... I know that you're now writing a book about film noir, which is great news. Another genre which is not, you know, subtle in the way we are discussing, that you don't see it. So what's your take on movies like Notorious, which do not hide their style? Do you have some preferences? Are you enjoying the subtle movies more?
Yeah, I like them. I like movies that don't hide their style. I think I touched on this issue of invisibility in the first book about lighting, but I think I was maybe a little kind of overly delicate with it, and so I tried to get the point across. I think more fully in the Dynamic Frame book that I just don't think invisibility is a very helpful concept in understanding Hollywood films, and I think it partly has to do with my sense that I agree with the contention that Hollywood films are very concerned with storytelling, and to me, storytelling by definition involves, you know, a storyteller, you know, which you know could be an auteur, but it could also just be a collaborative group of filmmakers, and you know, it can be more or less subtle, and I actually enjoy. You know, subtle touches, but I also enjoy sort of bold touches. If I had to pick, I'd probably say I tend to prefer the bold films. You know, I mean, thinking about contemporary filmmakers, I like Alfonso Cuarón, who I think frequently works in that very bold mode.
You wrote a book about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah. I wrote a book about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and I'm also a big admirer of Children of Men. Roma, I like quite a bit. So I do tend to gravitate toward bold stylists.
Gravity. Speaking of Cuarón, right?
Notorious. You know, the lighting is stylized, you know, and certainly the camera work throughout is highly stylized. You mentioned before, you know, the bit with, you know, the wind in her hair, you know, that's just such a bold stylistic device. I
have three short questions. I will just ask them in succession. First of all, is Notorious a noir film?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm in my book about film noir, I tend to try and define the category very broadly. So I am inclined to count it. I'd probably say, you know, the bleakness of the romance is really extraordinary in Notorious. How she's so in love with him and he is so cold to her, that kind of bleakness seems of a piece with noir. Stylistically, there are a number of affinities, but the other genre that it's interacting with would be the Gothic. You know, a woman marries a man whom, in this case, she knows well, but still she doesn't know everything about him. You know, there's still something mysterious about him, and then she has to investigate him, and that investigation often takes the form of investigating the house and like the secret rooms in the house. I mean, that certainly seems like very common in the Gothic film.
So noir Gothic.
Noir Gothic, yes,
okay.
yeah, contemporary noir Gothic.
Second question: Last year, Guillermo del Toro made a remake of Nightmare Alley from 1947. So, can you imagine a remake of Notorious, and who should direct it, and who should be the DOP on it, if it was to be remade nowadays?
Okay, yeah, I'll have to think about that one. I mean, immediately, I mean, Guillermo del Toro would not be a bad choice for that.
He's a Hitchcock scholar, right, as well?
Yeah. No, and I his movies, in terms of their tonalities, they have that noir tonality of just those really rich, dark shadows, but then with that layer of color, where the color is just so meaningful, and like the progression of color as the story is progressing, that seems like something that Hitchcock would be very sympathetic to, and I'm sure you'll be getting into this later.
Yes, actually, two episodes from now. Yes.
We'll be getting to that very, very soon. But yeah, Del Toro's usage of color does seem, influenced by, or at least continuing this tradition that I think of as Hitchcock.
Okay.
Color. And so I think he would be a terrific choice. And I will say we watched. I was really looking forward to Nightmare Alley, the remake, and I ended up preferring. I think I prefer the first one.
The first.
But maybe it's I don't know. Maybe it was a question of pacing or tone. But some things I thought worked really, really well.
The last question that I have is to both of you a bit. I actually, when I was traveling here today, I was thinking about it. I love the key scene in Notorious, but I thought to myself today, is it realistic for her to hold this key in her hand at this party? Like, is it realistic? Wouldn't she have it actually in like a pocket or something? So, does it even matter?
Or in her bra, actually.
Or in her, lingerie, wherever. But she's actually holding it in her hand. So the question is, does it matter, right? I mean, what's more important in this moment, like the stylistic flourish or the common sense question, like, would I be holding this key in my hand? I don't know what you think.
For me, it doesn't matter at all. Yeah, okay. I think that Hitchcock, I just think Hitchcock liked, bold visual ideas, and if the effect is bold enough, I think we can. You can just sort of get away with it. And in that moment, I'm just, I'm so curious about where's this camera going, and I see the key. That's such a sort of great reveal, and then the story just keeps moving. And it really heads into, I think, one of the best suspense sequences in all of Hitchcock for me. The cellar sequence. So I just think the pacing, you don't have time while you're watching it for the first time to say, oh, that doesn't really work.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that you were thinking about it somewhere on your way,
yes,
outside
not
of
during the screening.
Not during the screening. I think that's points. Yeah.
And I one more thought on this on realism of it's just the detail of when he was working with Ernest Lehman on the screenplay for North by Northwest, it seems like, and I've looked at some of the Lehman papers, which are in Austin, a couple hours away, and I guess they must have bounced around lots of ideas, and one of the ideas, the idea of a scene set in a Detroit, car factory, and that they're like building the car, bit by bit in the factory, and then at the end they open the door and a body falls out, and it's like, it makes no sense at all, but it's just has such a dramatic impact that I kind of wish they had done it.
Exactly.
I mentioned the imagination, which I wanted us to use for that case, but I didn't get to the point yet. So now another thing which I find so impressive and important for me in your work is, for example, the way you describe the shift from academic ratio to widescreen. Right? It's like, it's mind blowing the way you pile up the problems that cinematographers and directors had. So another short question: do you think Notorious would work? I'm not even saying about color, but let's say in widescreen, right? In a movie which is so, I think one of the ways you can show it to students is to precisely discuss that ratio. I mean, how well it works in that particular piece of fiction. So do you think, what would happen with this film if it were to be shot in widescreen?
Yeah, I think it would lose something, and I think it would lose something in the close-ups. I don't know. There's just something about a close-up in 4:3 where just the face just dominates the entire frame. And then even if you do a big close-up in widescreen, which would have been hard in the 50s, you've still got all this other screen to worry about. I just don't know if we would have that. You'd be gaining something, but I do think you'd be losing this quality of the close-ups. And I'm thinking of at the end of the cellar scene when they kiss, and those close-ups of Ingrid Bergman are just so powerful. That her love for Devlin has just been, she's just so reminded of that, and then he pushes her away. It's just such a devastating moment in the scene, and having that big close up, it gives it so much of its power. Yeah, and Ingrid Bergman, such an exceptional actor. It just has to be one of the best actors.
We started this conversation today actually by acknowledging that this is a really great performance. That she's really, really great, really great.
Yes, definitely. So it's good to know that you're in the club, let's say, with us. So on a more personal note, if you were to write a monograph, for example, I mean, what are your preferences, your favorite filmmakers? Because you are very, I would say, picky when it comes to you give a great number of examples, which is awesome. You can feel, the reader feels that you saw it all. You saw all important classical movies like Peter Bogdanovich did in the 60s. That's something you did. But I wonder, like, on a more personal note, like your favorite filmmakers, movies, would Hitchcock be somewhere close or not really? You're just, interested in his movies because they are part of Hollywood history, but he's not really touching you personally. What would be the case here? Yeah, your favorite.
I rate Hitchcock very highly. I certainly. I've seen most of the Hitchcock films. Maybe I haven't seen all of them, but I've seen most of them. And even when I was young, I had seen very large number of them. So I've been into Hitchcock ever since I was a teenager. So I rate him very highly. Of other filmmakers, I do like very visual filmmakers. I like Spielberg quite a bit. And here's a filmmaker who I think is very Hitchcockian, who I like a lot, M. Night Shyamalan. You've mentioned the idea of writing a monograph. I have toyed with the idea of writing a monograph on M. Night Shyamalan. He's a very inconsistent director. I mean, I think he's definitely made some bad movies, but I think when he's on, I think he's really terrific. Glass I liked quite a bit, and
Split. What about Split? One of my recent favorites.
Okay, yeah. I thought Split was also strong. Yeah.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that, and we're looking forward to your book on noir. And again, thank you so much for finding the time. This was really a great honor for us. So good luck with your projects, and thank you for your books and for everything that you are doing.
Okay, thank you so much, and I will continue listening to the podcast. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Wow, I'm so happy that we had this occasion to speak to Professor Patrick Keating. We need to stress this. We are fans of those books. I mean, I read only The Dynamic Frame, which is, I think, probably in my top 10 of books ever about films. So it was a great conversation. And well, how about you? Like, do we have anything to add, or is this really the pinnacle? Are we looking forward to any other films in the 40s, or is this the pinnacle of the 40s Hitchcock? I think it is.
I think it is. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, because we are in store. We have fascinating films like Parenting Case, Rope, Under Capricorn, in which we will see Ingrid Bergman returning, and let's say Stage Fright as the ending of the decade. But none of those films are as accomplished, I would say, as Notorious, right?
No, definitely not. And I think, like, coming towards the end of the episode, I'm a bit afraid as a viewer to study, perfect films. Of course, that's a problem because some of Hitchcock's are perfect. But for example, Rear Window, I know it's also one of your very favorites.
Yes.
It's one of the films that, although you can say whatever it means that it's perfect, you somehow want to inhabit that world and again. And I have this feeling towards Rear Window, Psycho, I should say as well, and so on. And I think Notorious is the first Hitchcock film that, although it's perfect, it also creates a world that I want to inhabit for a longer period of time. So I was a bit worried, coming back to this film, reading a lot about it, will I lose something, like some of the pleasure of getting back to Notorious? I think no. I still think maybe it's part of our cerebral response to the beauty of this film. But also, as we are stressing in this episode, and I think it's so important, and Patrick Keating, even mentioned that, Ingrid Bergman, right? I mean, that's the real heart of this film. So I think to all the formalists out there, I think the reason why it works so well is precisely because you have perfect, technical perfection, narrative perfection, and so on, but also you have something very touching at the center of this film. And probably, this is what makes real masterpieces. So I am happy, to make a simple point, I'm happy that Notorious is not only about technical perfection. It's not only a film to study and admire, its patterns and perfect style, but also it's a really touching film. And I agree with David Thompson from Have You Seen, his book about movies. That is probably the first Hitchcock film of this kind, like deeply personal on some level, probably deeply felt. And I think it's the taste of things to come, that we'll have similar feelings, maybe some of the viewers, when we'll be watching his 1950s movies, that you want to come back to this film. In my case, it's the first film of this kind. I admire Shadow of a Doubt, Foreign Correspondent, Rebecca, but these are not really movies that I feel this need to come back, like, from time to time. Notorious it's a film I'll be coming back to.
I agree, and I will be coming back to the film. I think it's really exceptional, probably in my top 5, Hitchcock top 5. I just want to mention that if you want to get the taste of how daring this film is, you can compare it to other films that were competing for Oscars that year, like next year actually, 1947. That was the year when The Best Years of Our Lives won the Best Picture, so a very noble film about post-war America, and yet, years light away from this complex erotic turf of treachery-ridden Rio de Janeiro. So, this was the year of William Wyler, of Sam Goldwyn, of this wholesome, also adult, but not even remotely sexual film, The Best Years of Our Lives. And Ingrid Bergman, I think, was robbed of a nomination. She wasn't even nominated for this film. Olivia de Havilland won for To Each His Own. And in Best Supporting Actor category, because this film had only 2 nominations. Best Supporting Actor, in which Claude Rains got defeated by Harold Russell, so the actor from The Best Years, who was actually a war veteran who lost his hands in the war effort. And this is, I think, the scandalous category, Best Original Screenplay, because Ben Kecht should have won. He competed against the brilliant Jacques Prévert, who wrote Children of Paradise, and yet the Oscar went to The Seventh Veil, which is a completely forgotten film. And really, I mean, this is the one award that the film should have won. I'm not even mentioning
unless maybe it should have been nominated in simply the best screenplay or adapted screenplay category, because there is a basis to Notorious. Erased to a large part, but it's technically it is based on
like a spy anecdote. It's, you can also say it was based on Mata Hari.
No, like,
yeah, but there was a story in Saturday Evening Post.
Exactly.
Right, but it's a shame that it wasn't more recognized in those terms, especially after the wonderful Oscar success of Rebecca. But still, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Sebastian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just the last point, because when we are talking about such a film, which is so, there are so many comments about it and so on, I was thinking, well, what can I add to the conversation? I had just one idea, because I'm a sucker for Cold War movies, spy stories. Although it's not technically a Cold War movie, try to think about the many ways in which it kind of is. It's almost like a Cold War story in terms of, like, I was thinking about John le Carré novels, like, which are very morally ambiguous. So there is no Cold War yet, right? Let's say 45, 46. Technically, it's not that period in world history, but it's getting there. So in one way, Notorious, was ahead of the time because of the bomb MacGuffin, but also I think you can read this story and you can watch it as a kind of a Cold War story with, special forces being kind of morally corrupt, with generally like this level of ambiguity, shadow, and like it's opening a new chapter. It doesn't feel like a World War II movie, right? I think it's very Cold War-ish, which maybe was part of its appeal, in the 50s and 60s. I don't know.
Well, I would say it's a pre-Cold War Gothic, made at the time when Cold War categories were just being defined, because I think to have a Cold War film you need to have Soviet Union and you need to have communism. Here you don't have it, because there's not yet the sense that there are those two opposites, the United States and the Soviet Union. And yet I would agree that it's like this pre-freeze.
Yes, because you're totally right. Of course, we don't have Soviet Union, but only this one element that, let's say, World War II spies, it could be fun and exciting. But Cold War spies, in these mature stories, it's like, as I mentioned, like Le Carré, like this kind of adaptations. It's full of anxiety, despair, loneliness, and so on. And in this way, I think the image of spies, that's what I wanted to maybe come with this point, that the image of spies is very Cold War-ish, because there is not much glamour. Cary Grant is, a very dark character. Bergman is tormented. In this way, I think it points to this Cold War sensibility.
Maybe, but I think still there's a crucial difference, because you don't yet have this very Le Carrean feeling of a stalemate. That we've been in this so long, we don't see the end of it, will it end in annihilation? Will it ever end? This is something that constitutes the Le Carré ennui, I would say. Here you really, I think it's a genuine film of its moment, because they don't know like what will happen. Actually, Hollywood should have made films like this in the 30s, when there were Nazi spies, and but the Hollywood studios were generally avoiding this subject, with some exceptions. So this is like a late anti-Nazi, pre-Cold War, like it's exactly in the middle between those two eras. Of course, Hitchcock is such a great artist that yes, I think he can already sense that this will be the sort of direction that things will be going. And I don't know, there's something also like almost operatic about this film, something also Ingrid Bergman brings a touch of European, Cary Grant as well. I mean,
Claude Rains.
None of those leading actors are American, Exactly. Claude Rains is a British guy, so is Cary Grant, and she's Swedish, so there's a touch of Europe. And by the way, I forgot to mention this when we were talking to Patrick. My favorite shot in the film that just tells you about subjectivity and also about Hitchcock being a complete master of his language is this shot of those 5 Nazis kissing her hand in sequence. Because first of all, they are perfectly cast. You can sense this unwanted intimacy. She doesn't really want their lips, on her hand, and yet they are very courteously, very slowly bestowing those 5 kisses. and you just crawl in your skin because you don't want to be touched by those creeps. And
Exactly.
and this is a simple scene. It's one shot, and yet it's perfect. And Hitchcock knows that by placing us in her subjectivity, we know that she's being violated at this moment. She's going on because she's on a mission, of course. But these men are really creepy, dangerous, and you can almost smell their sweat or their bad cologne as they are approaching her. So I think this is the essence of Hitchcock.
Exactly, and Patrick Keating mentioned that Hitchcock would never go as far as Lady in the Lake, but this is precisely the Lady in the Lake-like scene. Exactly this prolonged shot when this POV starts to be, as you mentioned, it's creepy.
Yes, and it's Lady in the Lake minus the simple-mindedness of Robert Montgomery. I'm sorry.
Yeah, both as a performer and director.
Because he said, so they will look into the camera and then we will feel it. No, here they don't look at the camera. They look a little bit, off the angle. And yet you are in Ingrid Bergman's skin in that moment. So I think this is something...
so that's another scene which kind of encapsulates the power of the whole film.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we are now wrapping up this episode. We are already lining up some great episodes and guests for you. We have some really exciting guests coming up. And next time we'll talk about a film which is not in the Hitchcock canon, I would say, Paradise Case. Still a film of many interests. And then the big break in our podcast, the first color film that Hitchcock made, Rope.
Oh, that would be great.
Yes.
And first independently produced.
1948. And this on many levels will be a fascinating film.
Yeah.
So please, if you enjoyed this episode, rate us on iTunes. This is a very small effort. I mean, it's a big effort for us to make the...
But manpower is limited.
Yeah, the manpower is limited. So every single rating on iTunes makes this podcast more likely to be discovered by other Hitchcock fans. So please share, please rate.
And just the big thanks to one of our listeners, talking about our listeners and fans, Veiko Suvanto. Thank you for helping with gathering materials for this episode.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, if you like the episode, please like our fan page on Facebook. Please share the episodes with your Hitchcock-minded friends. And the next time we will hear each other will be on Paradise Case. We are recording this on the last day of August in Warsaw. I'm Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined by
Sebastian Smoliński.
foreign correspondents.
Deeper into Hitchcock.